Hey everyone, it is Dani and welcome to this update video on what is happening right now across the tropics. And so we'll be taking a look at what is going on in terms of the precipitation as well as wave heights, and we'll also be taking a look at the ENSO region. So there is a possibility that we could be going into an El Nino during the latter part of this year. So I'll be taking you guys through what is expected and what is currently happening. And so before I go into details, please do subscribe if you haven't done so already and tap the notification bell so that you never miss an important update. Okay, and so let's briefly talk about what is going on right now across the tropics. And so we can see here that we have a bit of activity that is moving into the Caribbean coming out of the Atlantic, and we definitely see that other cold front that extends from parts of the Gulf of Mexico out into the Atlantic. And so looking at a closer view of the Caribbean here on infrared satellites, we can see these cloud clusters here and there, and so this is likely to result in overcast skies and intermittent rainfall for parts of especially the eastern Caribbean. So for the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and for most of the Lesser Antilles. And so we're not seeing anything too colorful right now, which indicates that there aren't any areas of major convection right now in the Caribbean, and this is going to be the general trend as we progress throughout the rest of February and heading into March. However, as we're going to be progressing into April and going into May, we're going to be seeing more precipitation in the basin, but of course that is to talk about when it happens. And so let's go ahead and take a look at the rainfall that is expected by two of our models, the GFS and the Euro, and we're going to be starting out with GFS. And so if you're not too familiar with this map, the different colors indicate different rainfall totals expected in inches, and so we can see the different shades on the right side of your screen as well as how much each shade is representing. So that is what the values beside them mean. And so between now and Wednesday, so this is for the next couple of days, this is the total rainfall expected throughout the region. So we can see that the highest totals are in the vicinity of Central America, and we see some of those lilac shades along the southeastern coast of Nicaragua and also just off the coast of Costa Rica and western Panama, and we see some of those blue shades as well in the vicinity of the ABC Islands and parts of the Lesser Antilles. And so moving on to the Euro, something pretty much similar being shown here, but of course no major rainfall event is anticipated because, of course, as I said, this is what is expected between now and Wednesday. It's the accumulated precipitation across the region that is being forecasted here. So not much anticipated, as I said, as we saw on satellites, there wasn't much going on. So let's now progress into the expected wave heights. And so similar application here in terms of the colors and the values that each of these shades represent, but we have the arrows showing the direction from which the wind is blowing. So we are focusing on the Caribbean, and this is a map from the Euro model. So this is a map of the significant wave height measured in feet. So we can definitely see here that winds are going to be coming out of the northeast for the most part as we're going to be progressing throughout today. So strong winds across parts of the eastern Caribbean islands are likely, and we see that spot just off Colombia. So there is low pressure that sits in that area. So when that high interacts with the low pressure, that is what induces some of those stronger winds. And so the high pressure is just within that region. So take a look at the arrows. We see that clockwise direction. So that is how winds within high pressure systems blow in the northern hemisphere. So we have winds blowing in a clockwise direction. So that is the reason with the current position of the high, we're having winds blowing from the northeast for the eastern Caribbean islands here. And that in turn leads to those more significant wave heights being seen. So where we see some of those very bright shades of yellows, that is indicating some of those higher wave heights in the vicinity of the eastern Caribbean. And so as we're going to be heading into the early part of next week and going into the middle part of the week, we're seeing a gradual decrease in the intensity of those winds as well as the height of those waves. And and so that is what is expected in terms of that. And now let's go ahead and talk about the ENSO. So ENSO stands for El Nino Southern Oscillation. Actually, several weeks ago I did a video explaining how that works, but just to give you a briefing on it, the El Nino phase is when conditions, or sea surface temperatures rather, are warmer in the eastern Pacific. Meanwhile, a La Nina is when the sea surface temperatures are cooler than normal in the eastern Pacific. And so when we have the cooler conditions across the eastern Pacific, that typically results in less interference in terms of activity over in the Atlantic basin, and thus La Nina seasons help to induce a bit more activity across the Atlantic. However, that is the opposite for an El Nino. So as of earlier this year, an El Nino was being forecasted as we're going to be heading into the latter part of this year, but of course that is not certain. There is no certainty with that happening for sure. So there's a pretty good chance that heading into the spring, we might enter ENSO neutral conditions. And so let's go ahead and look at this graph here. So when we're between plus 0.5 and minus 0.5, that is the neutral phase of the ENSO. Below minus 0.5 is when we're in a La Nina phase, which we're currently in, and above plus 0.5 is when there is that El Nino phase. So the latest value, as we can see over to the top right side of your screen, is minus 0.769. So if we head into that neutral phase, there isn't going to be too much variation from what is typical, and heading into the El Nino phase is when we're going to be seeing more activity over in the Pacific but less in the Atlantic, because there is likely going to be that increase in vertical wind shear. And as you may know if you watch my update videos from last year, when there is stronger vertical wind shear in the upper atmosphere, that usually results in less activity and disrupts any tropical cyclone trying to develop. So the wind shear plays a very huge part of the development or the cyclogenesis of storms during the hurricane season. So there is no certainty, as I said, but as of the only prediction for this hurricane season, that was from the tropical storm risk back in December last year, that predicted 13 named storms, 6 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. So a very near normal season that the TSR is forecasting. But of course, we could see a bit more or could see a bit less activity. If we're looking at a neutral ENSO season, for the most part, we could see something a little bit similar to what happened last year. But of course, less activity doesn't mean that there isn't going to be any major storms, because there was Ian that was near Category 5 intensity that wreaked havoc across parts of western Cuba as well as Florida. So guys, as time goes by, I'm going to be talking about the hurricane season a lot more, and more predictions will be coming out as we're going to be heading into the spring and heading into especially April and going to May. So May is when the NOAA is going to be releasing their prediction for their expectations of this hurricane season. But I'll be keeping you guys updated as time goes by. And so that is really it for right now. And if you have any questions, you can leave them down in the comments, and you can also share your thoughts